And before we go to questions, I just want to leave you with one or two important things that I learned. We live in this, especially those of us in politics, live in this media culture where we're so totally focused on what's going on in the media. And I don't think we shouldn't know what's going on in the media. Not at all. But we have to remember that we can make change in places and in arenas when the media isn't paying attention to us. That there's two different goals sometimes. When you're working in your communities, you need to ask yourself, am I doing this to change the media debate, or am I doing this to change things? Right? Because oftentimes, change is happening and the media isn't paying attention to it. And we get obsessed with, well, why isn't the media paying attention to it? And the problem really is the media. And the problem really is, part of the problem is the media. But I hope when you read this book, you see that there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of really important change that you can be a part of that the media ignores. And that being a part of it doesn't mean, being a part of something that the media doesn't pay attention to, doesn't mean it's not important. And this is the second part of what I want to just end with before we do some questions, which is the media tells us subversive messages. It tells us that the only arena of change is the presidential level. And I've been watching TV right up here. The only thing you see up here is Barack Obama and John McCain, which, whatever the story is, the underlying storyline is that that's the only thing that matters for you when you get involved in politics. Now, I think the presidential race is very important, and I hope Barack Obama wins. But I also think that the problem for us is that we are being trained to not focus our attention on the congressional, state, municipal, and local electoral arenas that have a huge amount of power and that we can make a huge amount of impact on. Some statistics. 30 states had to pass civil rights legislation before Congress ever debated it. States control about 1.5 times the amount of non-defense discretionary spending as the federal government. These are just two examples. So when we focus all of our attention only on the presidential arena, which of course is the arena structurally designed most to resist the popular will, when we do that, we leave a huge amount of power on the table that the other side will wield and is wielding. So I would encourage you, and I know a lot of you are doing it already, to keep your eye both on the presidential race and on your state legislative races, your municipal races, also in part because you can have more of a direct impact on those races. It's an economy of scale, a comparative advantage. You put this many people in the room with a presidential candidate, and they might listen to you, and they might not. You put this many people in the room with your state legislator, and they're going to be listening, not necessarily saying that they're going to do exactly what you want, but the smaller the election, the smaller the arena you go, the more power you can have. And that is really, I think, what this uprising is about actually taking this ferment and making sure that it becomes something that wields real power. We've had enough, I think, of just complaining about it and blowing off steam about it. That's what the uprising really is that people have gone from watching TV and muttering to themselves saying, if I don't get involved and do something, then there's not going to be the country that I live in anymore. And that's a direct quote, by the way, from one of the Minutemen. He said, I just felt like I had to go do something. Now again, I don't agree with the Minutemen, but the impulse that we have to take this anger and put it into something concrete and make sure something real comes out of it, that is really what is fueling this moment. And it's a high stakes moment. And I'll say in closing that like I say at every event, 20 years from now, we're going to look back at this moment and we'll say that was either the moment that the country completely drove off the cliff, or that was the moment we made this the country that we always knew it could be and has been in the past and can be in the future. And what that outcome is will be either our blame or our achievement. That it really will be our fault. Each one of us will be our fault if it doesn't go into that direction that we want it to, or it will be our achievement. Because all things being equal, it's never going to get easier than this. for progressives, ever. You got the most unpopular president in history who happens to be a Republican. He's going to take a huge amount of blame for the policies that he is mostly to blame for, although not 100% to blame for. Half the Democrats in Congress voted for Iraq. The Democrats, when Clinton was in office, pushed the trade policies that have decimated the middle class. But again, the Republicans are going to take most of the blame. So if we can't make change now, we're never going to be able to make change. If we allow this country to be driven off the cliff, it will really be our fault. So that's a huge amount of responsibility. It's almost like a crushing burden of responsibility. But I think we're up to it. I really think that we are really, truly up to it. That our side, more than I've ever seen in my time in politics, is more energized, and I actually think more willing to try to understand what a movement psychology is rather than a partisan one than we have been in the past. So this is a very, very exciting time with a huge amount of possibility and a very, very high stakes time. So when you go out of here and you read all 10 copies of my book that each of you will buy, I hope that what you say is it's time for me to get involved, it's time for me to get as many people involved as possible, because if I get involved, we can really make a huge change. And if I don't get involved, somebody else will, and somebody else will drive this moment into precisely the opposite of where I want our country to go. I think this is really the moment for us really to take the country into a direction and see exponential change like we haven't seen. There have been 3 uprising elections in the last 100 years, 1932, 1964, and 1980. They followed eras of basically political gridlock, and exponential change came out of them very, very, very fast. So when you think, well, how can there be such major change out of such an era of stagnation and political gridlock? Just look at history. It was worse during the Great Depression than it is now. And the folks back then created, the progressive folks back then took that moment that was worse than now and built it into something that was a huge moment for our country. If they can do it back then, we can do it now. I know all of you here are doing it, and I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for coming out, and I'm happy to take